It is our pleasure to be joined by the smartest man covering college football. The SP Plus is his brainchild. Bill Connelly from ESPN is in the house. Bill, how's it going, man? Good to see you.
Not too bad. How are you guys doing?
Doing good. I mean, just trying to recover from your strength of schedule article you put out. Other than that, we're good.
I mean, you wanted all I heard from OU fans is we want better home schedules. Well, you got it.
That's
That's
right.
that's like the
We
monkey paw thing. Okay, you get your wish, but
can we start in a more positive direction? Can we talk? Let's talk about the returning production. How about
it's
that?
good. It's good.
Top 10? I saw they ranked 10th. The Sooners ranked 10th in your returning production metric for the 2025 season. I guess my question is, Bill, what should OU fans take from that?
Well, I mean, number one, the most important thing to remember about returning production conversations is we're talking about getting better or worse, not like being good or bad. Like that's always kind of you see your team's name at the top. Like, what's a good example here? Texas Tech is fourth this year. Kennesaw State's fifth. That doesn't mean Kennesaw State's going to be awesome in a Conference USA contender. It just means they're going to be better than they were last year, most likely. And I mean, OU, breaking it out in offense and defense, sixth on offense, 46th on defense. Kind of stands to reason that if you had your worst offense in 25 years or whatever it was, maybe that means it was a pretty young offense that's going to return more guys than it did a year ago. So combine that with the fact that the way I have to calculate all this, like OU now gets credit for John Mateer's production, and the receivers that are coming in as well. I give kind of half credit to the FCS guys, so getting two really solid FCS receivers is kind of like getting one solid FBS receiver, and so that all kind of gets plugged in and. Yeah, from a continuity standpoint, from a pure experience standpoint, OU certainly looks further along than it did last year on that side of the ball.
Yeah, and it's interesting whenever you factor in. Does is there like a weight in the metric for? I guess what I was going to say is where's Washington State fall in that?
Right.
How do you classify that?
Yeah, I mean it's called returning production because that's what I always called it. It really is returning plus incoming production, and so yeah, at some point when I have a big chunk of time, which I never allow myself to have, I want to play with like the specific weighting of when you bring in 3,000 passing yards, like how what does that exactly mean as compared to losing 3,000? But no, I mean that's yeah, you absolutely get credit for Mateer, get credit for was it Gibson and Lewis, FCS receivers, the Stanford offensive lineman, that all gets plugged in, and it's full credit for FBS guys, even if they were G5 or whatever.
So that's good. We should be excited, is what you're telling me.
It should be. You shouldn't have to watch the offense you watched for most of last season again. That is a very good thing, I think.
That is, and a lot of it is going to be dependent on the new offensive coordinator,
Yeah.
Ben Arbuckle. You wrote a really interesting article on how coaching changes affect a team's production the next season. What type of effect do you think Ben Arbuckle will have on this Oklahoma offense?
Yeah, it was. I mean, what I put out this week was very, I mean, kind of no duh kind of stuff, but being able to quantify coaching changes and whether you're likely to improve or regress. It's basically the whole thing comes down to basically, last year versus like a 20-year average. Any sort of, attempt I made at this, I wasn't kind of looking at a broad enough scale. But if you compare last year's like offensive, if you're OU offensive performance versus a 20-year average, obviously it was ridiculously lower than kind of the normal OU offense over 20 years. Well, that pretty much assures, especially if you make a coordinator change, you're probably going to improve. So combine that with the returning production, and that I do think that lends a certain amount of optimism. But if you were way above the 20-year average and you changed head coaches, for instance, that probably means you're a smaller school and you just lost your head coach to a bigger school, and now you're probably going to regress back towards the mean. that's, it's all very logical, but being able to kind of quantify that, I should be able to incorporate that into projections in the future. And that should mean good things for OU's projections, because this is one of the most consistent offensive schools in college football. And it just didn't really work last year. So in theory, all signs point to improvement. It's just a question of how much.
How do you view it on the defensive side? They since Venables has been at Oklahoma, the first year Ted Roof was the defensive coordinator. In 23, Venables called the defense, and then last year Zach Alley called the defense. I mean, it's kind of morphed and changed a little bit. And he says he's going to be calling the defense this year. Like, how do you project that? I mean, how's that kind of changed throughout those years?
Yeah, I mean, I want to incorporate coordinator changes into my projections, but then also it's such a nebulous thing every single school, like what a coordinator is at one school, like who's calling the plays, the responsibilities and everything are different everywhere. So it's going to be, I have to keep that in mind. It is going to be a little tricky, but no, I mean, OU's just in a weird place. Worst offense in 25 years, best defense in like 11 years last year. Like jumped up to 17th in my rankings from 38th the year before. And now they also have theoretically a new coordinator, whether it's Venables or the actual coordinator. I mean, basically there might be a little bit of regression baked into the defense just after it's kind of a middling kind of returning production total, and after kind of a historic high or recent history high. Yeah, we'll see. I personally like. R. Mason Thomas is phenomenal. I like Kendall Daniels, the OSU, getting a couple of talented transfers from disappointing defenses was a fun touch with him and Marvin Jones Jr. But I think they both will add disruption to the front six. Secondary, we'll see about losing Bowman, but just from a personnel standpoint, my opinion of the defense is it should be still kind of top 25-ish, no matter who I'm actually listing as the coordinator. It should be a pretty solid unit.
I'm interested in if you've picked up any patterns over the years, Bill, when it comes to what's more important, the efficiency on the offensive side of the ball or the efficiency on the defensive side of the ball. I'm sure there's a balance between those to where but for teams that have a really good season, which I'm not entirely sure in today's day and age of college football, what's a really good season anymore, but what's the balance kind of look like between offensive efficiency and defensive efficiency?
Yeah, it's fun. On the NFL side, they've kind of figured out that offense is a little more consistent, than defense is. Defense can kind of fluctuate up and down. Offense is usually, if you were good and you return the right guys, you're going to stay good. And so they almost give more weight to the offensive side of the ball in that regard. I have not found it. It's 50-50 for me. I've never found any sort of, any sort of way to lean one way or the other, which I guess is a good thing. Offense and defense are equal, but I was kind of, once I saw where they were going on the NFL side, where the nerds were, the way they were playing with everything, I was kind of hoping to find like, oh, actually defense is 60% of success. It's 50-50 for me.
Do you have any other favorite metrics that are real interesting that you use to maybe get a different snapshot of a team that maybe surface level doesn't really stick out?
Well, I think it all ends up going into SP Plus eventually, but it has been kind of interesting just to kind of see how these projections have changed or how they're calculated through the years, the weights that are given to certain things. Like if I go back, I think 2019 was the best season SP Plus ever had, just in terms of the preseason projections, in season, it kind of killed that season. And then of course the world has changed 38 times since 2019. It was such a lovely idyllic time, but now it really is, the preseason numbers are based more on pure projection, last year's numbers plus returning production. The recent history doesn't quite matter as much as it used to, which it makes sense. You start thinking about the upset, like Indiana suddenly being a playoff team last year out of the blue. It does feel like things are a little less stable in that regard, which I guess is also more entertaining. So I'm not going to complain, but recent history doesn't matter as much. The way I measure recruiting, I used to be able to just kind of plug in a kind of a weighted 3, 4, 5 year average of freshman recruiting to kind of get at that talent level thing. Now it's basically for this year's for 2025, all that matters in the 2025 recruiting class is the transfer haul. And then eventually 2 or 3 years from now, suddenly those, the freshman recruits will carry more weight. But yeah, all the little pieces of this have changed pretty significantly over the last 3, 4, 5 years. And every change I have to make, I don't have much data to do it. I'm kind of taking guesses as far as, okay, well, 1 year of this must mean it's, the new reality. It's been kind of a weird environment.
How do you keep track of all the roster movement? Do you have to do that manually, or do you have a program that adjusts everything automatically? Like
it's
crazy, man.
It's literally a spreadsheet, a giant spreadsheet with 136 tabs, one for each team. Now there are calculations. I'm not making the calculations manually. I got all the the formulas set up, but no, I mean it's literally hopping into the roster and saying, okay, he's back, he's gone.
That sounds like a perfect job for AI.
Here's my theory on that, or an intern, that's something. But then what I realized is this is my version of Bill Belichick talking about padding and how just watching a game and writing things down for every single play commits it to memory better. Being able to actually go through and realize, okay, they lose more than I thought, and all the little thoughts you have as you're doing it. I think it helps me a lot just in terms of having opinions on teams and knowledge of teams in the off season. So I do it. It is ridiculous. It took a month basically to really get anywhere with returning production after the season ended. But I feel maybe I'm lying to myself. I feel it has value to still do it manually, even though it's a giant pain in the butt. And then I have to do it again, obviously, in another about month and a half once the portal opens again.
Has there been a team that, as you've been going through stuff, that maybe you didn't expect or people wouldn't expect, that has kind of climbed up through the rankings for you and it's caught your attention?
Well, one thing that definitely caught the numbers attention, and I'm having to sell myself on, this is a very boring answer really, but turns out Alabama might still be pretty good. In my head, we watched the way they collapsed at the end of last season, offensively at least. I mean, it was a giant mess, as OU fans know. That was, OU kind of suddenly created a blueprint for here's how to completely erase Alabama's offense. And so in my head, this is a rebuilding situation for them. SP Plus spits them out number 2 in the country. Mainly, the returning production outside the quarterback position is dynamite. Returning, leading rusher and bringing in a guy from Louisville, returning, I think, 3 of the top 4 receivers. Offensive line should be ridiculously good. The defense returns quite a bit, or more than Alabama normally returns. And so that was one of those things where that was where the numbers are convincing me, okay, fine. They're probably top 5 again. Kalen DeBoer, a year ago, I would have had him as one of the two best coaches in college football. So it's probably going to be okay for them. But, that's not a fun answer. I'm trying to think of a more interesting answer. I do think maybe Oregon falls a little bit more. That was one where when I'm comparing the, just as I was going along position by position, they lost a lot more than I really comprehended. They've been recruiting well. They do well in the portal, so they're still going to probably be a top 10 team, but probably at least third in the Big Ten. That was an interesting one. Ended up dumping them down a little bit more than I thought. This is not the best answer in the world, but Missouri also ended up higher than I expected. And really, that was another case of, as I was going through, okay, the defense is actually pretty sound here. Secondary should be super experienced. They might be a little more. It was easy to kind of expect a drop off, especially offense, with losing Brady Cook and Luther Burden and apparently a top first round offensive lineman as well. But the defense might be able to withstand that a little bit. They should be pretty solid as well.
You fudged the numbers for your Tigers. Don't lie. Come on.
I always lean on the fact that I like to be right. So even if it means that I'm saying negative things about teams that I have a little bias for, I want to be right in the end. Therefore, it does not help me to bump up my team.
Your SP Plus strength of schedule rankings were the talk of Sooner Nation for a while there, Bill. You have OU as having the toughest schedule in the country. in 2025. Is there anything you can tell us that should make us feel better about that?
I mean, number one is though you should be a top 20-ish level team on paper again. So therefore, even if you're playing a bunch of ridiculous opponents, you're going to land some blows. Yeah, but it is pretty, with Michigan coming to town, that basically means, 3 of the first 5 opponents are obviously really, weak, like projected 127th or worse. So that's, you can get off to a good start there. First 2 hard opponents are at home. But yeah, you end up playing 13, 23, 7, 16, 9, 8, 2, 15, and 10. So basically, you need to be a top 20 team to handle that. But this is a hard. I mean, number one, this isn't going to be every SEC schedule for OU. They drew the short straw apparently coming out of the gate here. But the rotation is such that they're going to still be playing merely solid teams in the future and winning more games in theory. But it is basically the way my strength of schedule rankings are, the ratings are established is basically like against your schedule, what would the average top 5 team do? How would they perform? And, the number it spit out was a 0.77 win percentage, which is equivalent to 9.2 wins. So a top 5 team would go 9-3 on average against OU's schedule. Obviously, if you're merely a top 15 or 20 team, that's more like 6-6 or 7-5. So it's rough, but I mean, just handle it, survive, improve the win total by a little bit, and then the schedule gets easier moving forward in theory.
Just out of curiosity, we made the move to the SEC with another team. What does the Longhorns' strength of schedule look like for 2025? I'm just out of curiosity.
It is 12th. So, I mean, not horrible. Obviously, it's easier, but it's not. What does that equate to? That's 9.9 wins. So about a little more than a half a win more on average for that generic top 5 team. So I mean, yeah, it's still tricky. They start off at Ohio State, so that certainly isn't easy. But then the rest of the way, it's more like top 20 teams instead of top 10 teams, and in theory that'll help them a little bit.
Yeah, I was surprised, unless I missed it when I was scanning it, there wasn't a Big 12 team in the top 25. Is it been shocking to see that drop?
Yeah, I mean, it really is just, because if we're thinking of this as a top 5, as how a top 5 team would handle it, which I guess I really probably need to think about making it like top 15, since my original thought was a playoff team. I guess I need to expand that a little bit. But basically, it comes down to like how many top 5, 10, 15, 20 teams are you playing? And Big 12 is my favorite conference still. It's, every game decided by 3 points. They like half the conference is ranked between like 18th and 36th in the SP Plus projections. But that still means you're playing mostly top 30 teams and not top 10 teams. And so therefore, where is the top Big 12 team? It's pretty, it's pretty far down
scrolling,
the list, I guess.
Scrolling, still scrolling.
OSU's 42nd. That's the first one. Baylor's in the 40s. Kansas and Colorado are in the 40s. So that seems to be about what it is. And I mean, it's not their fault, but it is obviously it's going to be an easier schedule overall if you're playing top 30 teams instead of top 10.
One of the other hot topics right now in college football is, well, there's a lot of hot topics. Unless you want to dive into the house case and you can explain all of that to us, I'd rather talk about the college football playoff and what the future of that looks like.
Yep.
I know you have strong opinions on this. If you were in charge, if you were the czar of the college football playoff, what would the system look like for you, Bill?
Yeah, regarding the house case, I just finished a book. It should come out in August. It's kind of just a big picture of how we get here, where are we going kind of thing for college football. The chapter on like player compensation or whatever, I think took as long as the rest of the book combined. Just figuring out what it means and what's important to write. Like it's hard. And
hold on, when does the book come out?
In theory, August. Book publishing takes long. Every single step takes longer than you think, but that's the goal. Because that's the best time to publish a college football book, I would say. But anyway, I just wrote a chapter about everything that led to the House settlement, and I still don't feel confident in what I know about it. It's
No
very
one
messy.
knows, man. It's okay. No one knows what's going on.
Stayed very big picture on that one. But anyway, so yeah, the more fun topic by far is college football playoff. And they let me write a little rant about all my thoughts about where things have headed, are heading, etc. This is turned into a very silly process. I mean, the SEC obviously, SEC and Big Ten a year ago arranged to make all the money from the playoff. To where no matter what, Mississippi State will get 20 million from the playoff, and the best AAC team will get like 1.7, no matter what. And that's as a fan of the underdog in general, that stinks, but it's good for the SEC, I guess. And now, of course, the SEC and Big Ten are trying to legislate a certain number of teams in the new playoff, even though they'd get those teams anyway. And it feels like we want this to look as rigged as possible when we should just have a number one, forget 14. 14's a dumb number. We're going to end up at 16 anyway. Go to 16. Just do it now. I would add another conference champion just so that the number one seed gets a little bit, A, inclusion, and B, the number one seed gets a little bit more of a reward. They probably have an easier game playing like a top 30-ish team instead of the 16th best team in the country. So I would definitely include that. I would completely get rid of 4-4-2-2-1-1. We don't need auto bids. Some year the ACC is not going to deserve two teams. Sometimes the SEC will get more than four. Just set a 16-teamer, define your number of conference champions, and then just let it play out, because even with harder schedules, that SEC is going to do just fine. Those were, I think, the bigger things. So I'll run this by you. This is something that this might be complete rationalization on my part, but I feel like once I laid it out, I feel like there's some reason to it. Number one, I want to go to quarterfinal home games like everybody else. They saw this new like nuclear substance that we created with the home environments for the first round of the playoff. And it absolutely, like, Kevin Jennings has played in pretty loud environments before, I'm pretty sure, but he couldn't hear at Penn State. So he calls timeout. It gets even louder. He immediately throws a pick six. Like, it was just, I can't even imagine how much the field was shaking for those things. And it was just incredible. So I want more of those games. But the more I thought about it, like the immediate response is that'll kill the bowls. It'll kill the Rose Bowl if they're merely hosting the number like 18 team versus 21 or something. But then I kind of played it out how it would have worked last year if we had 16 team playoff, and basically the four major bowls got number 17 through 24 to pick from. That would have basically ended up with, say the Rose Bowl wants a Big Ten team no matter what. Well, you get Illinois. Among those 17 through 24 teams, Missouri's in there. We could have a little bragging rights basketball thing for football, stick it in Pasadena, where Illinois and Missouri fans would be thrilled to go to Pasadena. You could send South Carolina to the Sugar Bowl. South Carolina fans would be thrilled to go to the Sugar Bowl for the first time. It's definitely not number 3 versus number 4 anymore. But if the whole idea of bowls moving forward is something fun I want to watch in a fun environment, South Carolina in the Sugar Bowl against Iowa State, Fiesta Bowl's BYU versus UNLV, BYU fans would fill that place. The Peach Bowl would have been like Syracuse versus Colorado, Kyle McCord versus Shedeur Sanders. Nobody could pass in college football this year, but they could. There were two of the ones that could. That seems fun. That's not a major game anymore. But like the point I was making in there is, do you remember who won the Peach Bowl this year? It was Texas Arizona State. Unless you were a fan of Texas or Arizona State, you might not remember, because it was just a neutral site playoff game in Atlanta. And then the winner got to play another major bowl game. Ohio State was won two major bowls, and nobody's going to remember that because they just won the national title in a completely different game instead. So if we want to make the bowls stand out, kind of almost feels like that's better to me, and not just because it would result in Missouri playing in the Rose Bowl.
That is interesting, with those bowls not being like the first rounds were different. I didn't remember who played in what. Like, it just kind of got lost in the process in there. That's interesting. So it is interesting, the automatic bid stuff. When you look back last year, it seemed to be what everyone was most frustrated about in the seeding, and then they want to do more of it now moving forward, which I thought was weird.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it really is, everybody's been throwing around the word invitational. It basically would look like an invitational now. And I mean, the Champions League in soccer does it this way. The best leagues or the most successful leagues get more teams and all that other stuff. But number one, a lot more teams qualify for the Champions League. So, that's that's different in that regard. But also, in the Champions League, it's based on success in the Champions League. They just want to say, like, no matter how good we are, how well we do, we're getting 4 teams no matter what. And that's just not, it's okay to allow merit. You already have all the brands. You're already going to get almost all of the playoff in a given year. And just trying to kind of hard code it, I don't think it benefits college football. And sometimes it wouldn't even benefit the SEC. Like I said, they could get 5 teams some year in a 16-team playoff. And instead you're basically coding it into where you get 4 and maybe a 5th if Notre Dame's not very good or something. And that's, we just don't need to think that hard. It feels like college football always, because college football is so different in general, with boosters being what they are, and we're relying on 18 to 22-year-old guys and a pointy football and all this other stuff. Like, it's always going to be weird and strange. We don't have to make everything weird and strange. We can actually make a very normal playoff and make it like all other levels of football in that regard.
What do you think the future of conference championship games looks like? Because if you go to 16, I don't know. It just feels like, I don't want to say it's a disadvantage to play in a conference championship game, but it just feels, it feels like it could be that way for some teams, depending on injuries and things, like all these different variables that can take place in a football game. So what do you think is the perfect formula there, blending the conference championship games and the playoff, or do you think they should go away?
Yeah, that's a very, very hard question. Yeah, I don't know what the best answer is. I mean, it's funny. With the 12-teamer, one of the things I liked as we were leading up to the 12-team playoff for the first time, like every coach I talked to the last few years, was that bye you get for winning your conference title. That's almost too big of an advantage, is what most of them thought. Like, that was a huge thing to play for, not having to play that first round game against another, top 12-ish kind of team. And this first year, all the teams that got byes lost. A couple of them weren't favorites, so it wasn't that big a surprise. It was kind of funny that 3 out of the 4 even favorites or underdogs, 3 out of the 4 teams, I think, started behind 14-0 in the first quarter, as if rust was a thing, a problem as compared to the team that had played a couple of weeks earlier. I don't know. Like, I'm not going to overreact to a 1-year sample, but it was not quite what I expected to see in that regard. It didn't feel like that bye was an advantage at all. And if the bye is not an advantage, then why is a conference title an advantage? It is hard. The idea of wanting to incentivize that still makes a lot of sense. And I realize with the SEC and Big Ten and even ACC and Big 12, if you know how many bids you're getting, then you can have that giant play-in thing that everybody was talking about for a little while. Once I started thinking about that, I started hating that idea really quickly, because, like the Big Ten, like I said in the piece, like Indiana goes 11-1, Iowa goes 8-4, and doesn't look like a playoff team for a single week all season. Iowa's a couple of bounces away from upsetting Indiana and getting a playoff bid out of nothing. And meanwhile, Indiana ends up 11-2 and misses out on the playoff because they didn't get it. They got a couple bad bounces against Iowa. I realize this is all kind of like basketball, so maybe it's not that big a deal, but that didn't feel right to me at all. And so, like, it's hard. Like, the regular season would mean less if you get these play-in games and all that, but maybe the conference title would mean more. I don't know. I don't know what the best answer is right now, because there's no question, if the SEC is going to get 4 or 5 teams in, then not having to play that week, even if you get a lower seed out of it, you can certainly from an injury standpoint, make something of that. Carson Beck example, for instance.
What do you think about the timing of it? It takes so damn long. It just kind of goes on forever. It's, whenever you think about the NFL and they get into the playoffs, and it's just bam, bam, bam. Obviously, You've got the week before the Super Bowl, but I don't know. maybe it helps build up anticipation, but for me, it's the opposite. I don't know. Do you think they tinker with the timing of it at all?
It was funny for me. As soon as I wrote like the big like quarterfinal, like on January 1st, my brain started trying to check out
Yeah.
because it was time for the season to end, and I had like three more huge previews to write after that. So it was definitely noticeable. I guess really the answer here is how much does college football want to compete with the NFL? Because you can easily set up a system to where you have those first round games same weekend. Really, I mean we can have the discussion of moving Army Navy and move everything up a week. I don't know if there's like I don't mind having the first round when we did, but you have that on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, the first round. Then you have the quarterfinals a week later on the weekend again. Problem is they're competing with the NFL, and it seems like they thought and thought and thought about the dates as a like how is there a magic formula so we don't have to get hurt by the NFL's ratings. And I don't think there is. I think you just need to have your playoff. If have the quarterfinals a week later, have your January 1 major bowls that don't involve the playoff at all because the quarterfinals are in on home fields. Have those on January 1st as normal. Just try to build that day up by itself as much as possible. Trust that people are going to watch college football on January 1 no matter what. And you can have your semifinals on the next Saturday. And basically you can at least cut a week out of the thing. The way I drew it up in the piece was first round would have been like December 19th through 21st, like it was last year or this past season. Quarterfinals are the 27th and 28th. Semifinals are the 4th. Finals are the 13th, which isn't that far from what we had before. It would save a week. You have 4-round playoff. You're going to have four. Like, that's 4 weeks at least. It's going to last a while no matter what. But we could have at least trimmed a little bit.
If the college football playoff came to you and said, Bill, we need a strength of schedule consultant because it was such a big topic heading into the playoff last season. I'm sure it will be a big topic heading into the playoff in 2025. Like, would you say yes? Would you accept?
I think they would probably make me quit my job first, which I don't know if I would accept that, but no, it's hard. It's obviously a really hard topic. I do try to apply numbers to it for that very reason, because we can really spin ourselves in circles talking about, well, they played so-and-so, but they played so-and-so. And we always treat strength of schedule like it's a how big a man are you competition, when like Oklahoma State would probably love to have harder schedules. They'd love to get an invitation to the SEC. They wouldn't say no. SMU wouldn't have turned down an SEC invitation last year. So it's not like it's their fault their schedules were weaker. I guess it is because they were bad for 30 years and therefore they don't have an SEC invitation. But still, it's a really hard topic. But I do think numbers are really important in that regard. And whether it's something new or whether it's just what we already have, I've got my SOS numbers. There are a lot of strength of schedule numbers out there. The resume rankings that strength of record or I've got my SP plus. There are plenty of those too. There are ways to put numbers to this. And I do think you look at the way college basketball works, everybody, whether they like the net rankings or not, whether they like the numbers involved or not, you can at least see, okay, we're number 12 on this list. This is what the committee is looking at to help decide this. It still helps in that regard. And, college football is never going to be like college basketball because you're only guaranteed 12 games as opposed to 32 or whatever. But it's still being able to put numbers to it and see where everybody ranks and understand what those numbers mean, and have fans and the team and coaches all understand how the committee is viewing this. It would definitely help a lot. One of the things I try to do late in a given season is look at I had a little formula. I kind of stumbled on a way, like, here's how the rankings usually work. And it was kind of a mix of, you take the polls, you take some of the strength of record type numbers, you mash them all together, and it usually gets at what the committee arrives at. That was kind of a useful thing. I think whether they actually look at strength of record or whatever or not, I think they're accounting for most of it one way or another, but it was kind of, I do think numbers would help. And they kind of proudly, we have smart people in this room. We don't need advanced metrics. We're going to figure this out by ourselves. Like, I'm not sure that works. I don't think that there's a lot of faith put in the system there. At least when everybody's looking at the same thing, we know what they're looking at, and that helps a lot, I think.
Yeah, there's a small group of people that walk among us and we don't even know necessarily who they are, but they're BCS lovers and they still think that the BCS should pick the teams. Is that something that you may see in the future? I mean, the committee always feels like, I mean, you have metrics that could do it pretty good, but
Yeah.
the human element allows it to be manipulated. I guess I don't know, but is that something you wish they do?
I would love it because, I mean, number one, you think back to the BCS, the words BCS formula were like the most hated in college football. The main problem the BCS had, and I always say this, they could only fit two teams on the field. That was the biggest issue. Was sometimes the top three, like the number three team, was every bit as deserving as the top two, and whoever got left out, there would be outrage, and that was just that was it. And the other problem with the BCS formula in general was every time it produced a controversial ranking, they would tweak something. They would neuter the computer rankings to make it more human based or whatever. The last year or one of the last years of the BCS, one of the most controversial decisions, so to speak, was Alabama over Oklahoma State. That was because of the polls. That was because of the humans that Alabama got in over Oklahoma State, I'm pretty sure. But no, I think that would be, maybe the poll aspect of the BCS formula is a committee that ranks teams 1 through 25. Maybe that's one way to get, you have that. And then you also have whatever we're going to decide this computer aspect of it is. And then you mash those two together at the end to have the final rankings. I wouldn't mind that at all. It'd save everybody money. They wouldn't have to fly to Dallas every week during the season. They could do it from home. They could have a Zoom call and vote. But I do think just whether you agree with the numbers all the time or not, just being able to see what's going into the discussion helps a ton. It also helps a ton that we're picking 12 teams or 14 or 16 or whatever. The bar gets lowered as far as outrage, but yeah, just as open as possible, I think helps a lot.
Bill, you're the man. It's always fun catching up, dude. It's always so interesting getting your thoughts on college football. We appreciate the time, buddy.
Absolutely.